Should I get started, or are we waiting? Okay. Um, Hi everyone. I believe our Blue Stoop host, whoever they might be, is having some audio problems, but you can hear me. Yeah, is that true? Yes, thumbs up. Yeah. Cool. Thanks for being here, guys. I'm excited to talk to you today about manuscript building. My name's Keith Kopka. I published my first poetry manuscript about a year ago. Next week. Wow, that's crazy. It doesn't seem like a year went by, but it also seems like 1,000 years went by because pandemic time, right? But I spent about 5 years before that submitting the manuscript. So I'm well versed in the slog that is manuscript preparation, and the kind of sometimes hopeless feeling cycle of submission and rejection, and monetary fallout that comes from that, quote unquote, sometimes hopeless. Yeah. I have some things that I was prepared to talk about, but I get the vibe with these things. I haven't been to a digital one. I used to go to them when they were in person back in the day, in the before times, or like the Wednesday hangouts. But I want to talk about things that are useful to you guys, right? And I want to make sure that I'm not talking about things that don't matter, or we're not repeating ourselves or whatever. So if there are specific questions that you guys have, or things that you're interested in talking about in regards to like compiling a manuscript, publication, the process, what happens after it gets accepted, anything from point A to point Z, say so potentially in this moment, either in the chat or out loud, as I talk to one white square, some names, and Shayna. thanks for turning your camera on. It's just you and me hanging out. Yeah, so does anybody have anything?
Whole lot. I was typing in the chat, but I'm kind of the only human here. So
do you want to talk about it, or do you want to type it in the chat so you can get it all down?
If everyone else doesn't mind, I'm totally open to just sharing it all. Because
Sure.
a lot of what's been on my mind when I have a chapbook that I'm shopping around while I turn into a big book, is how to meet the right people, if that really matters, how many coaches or like classes to work on the book before kind of closing the manuscript and saying enough, because there's always changes that can be made.
Sure.
How much formatting matters, and then when to bridge the gap between when to jump from a chapbook to a regular book.
Okay. I'm writing these down so I don't forget. So how many people to work with? Like, how many cooks do you want in the kitchen, right, on this manuscript? Because at some point, like you said, it's never done until potentially you turn in your final edits on your manuscript, right? But then even then you'll have a chance to revise when you get your new and selected coming out or something like that. But also things can feel over edited or under edited. So we'll talk about that. Then you were wondering about formatting. Formatting in terms of submissions, or formatting in terms of the text itself? Well, I guess they're kind of one and the same, but.
Well, since you said that, I have another question about the horrible cover letter. So like cover letter, bio, how to include everything. Right now, my manuscript is just like a boring ass font in black 12 point.
Sure.
the easiest way to read, so making it the most accessible, PDF versus docx.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start with that one. So advice varies on this in some ways. I think that the kind of rule of thumb is to and your other question was how to go from chapbook to full length, right? So I think that generally speaking, you should just follow whatever guidelines the press that you're submitting to sets forward. All of them are sometimes annoyingly specific and idiosyncratic, right? Like one press wants things to be single spaced, another press wants things to be double spaced. One press wants your name on the page with the manuscript, another one doesn't want your name anywhere, so on and so forth, right? I would say follow those rules. I would also say, as someone that's judged book contests and poetry contests across the board, the flash in a cover letter or in a manuscript isn't necessarily going to help you stand out as much as some people think that it might. I think that instead, at least in my book, it hurt people's chances because it felt like they were trying to distract me somehow from the poems themselves, because those are ultimately the most important things. And I mean, I've gotten cover letters where people tell me how they've made $1 million and lost it and gone across the ocean. And I had back in the day before the internet, I had somebody who cut out pornography and attached it to a cover letter. I've had all sorts of like wild stuff yeah, I know that Jan, that face is exactly what my face did. I've been glitter bombed. I've been this like across the board, and I can tell you 100% that the pornography didn't work. I can tell you that the glitter bomb didn't work. If your press, or if a press is doing their job and doing their job ethically, they really shouldn't be reading your cover letter until after they read your manuscript. And they shouldn't be really looking at your cover letter as more than a formality. I know that sometimes that doesn't happen. So I would say just be as clear and direct in it as possible. Say where, a lot of manuscripts don't allow you to say where individual poems are published in the manuscript itself. So use your cover letter as an opportunity for that, right? Highlight the kind of professional achievements that you've had. If you don't have many publications, or if you're not a let's like in the biz or whatever you want to call it, that's okay too. Ultimately the poems are what's gonna matter. And so I would say that in the space of that cover letter, just thank the editor for their hard work. Tell them that the manuscript was simultaneously submitted, and give a brief biography, even if that biography is something like so-and-so is an emerging writer who is continuing to send their work out and looks forward to hearing from you soon, or something like that. I know that maybe is this advice that you've heard before, Shayna, or is this helpful? I can't hear you, but that's okay.
Yeah, I have a fancy mouse and a computer mouse, and
that's okay.
That computer. So a lot of this is actually very different from what I'd heard, but I wasn't getting a lot of traction with what I was working with.
Okay.
So that's part of the reason why I'm, here and asking all these questions.
I can show you. I have it somewhere. This might be helpful for many people. I just got to pull it up because it's cover letters. This is what my cover letter looked like I'm going to share my screen real quick. This is what my cover letter looked like when I was sending out my book. Did that work? Can you guys see that? It's about as simple as it can possibly be, right? I mean, I ultimately had success, but like I did send it a lot of times. But I never really thought a lot about the cover letter. I just kind of thought of it as the same as a cover letter I would send when submitting poems, except saying full length manuscript at the beginning instead of saying poems. Is that helpful to see that?
Yeah, super helpful. Do you mind if I screenshot?
No, not at all. Yeah, go for it.
Amazing. Thank you.
Tell me when you're done, and I'll stop sharing this because it's like really awkward on my screen.
Done.
Okay, cool. Which kind of, in reverse order, you asked about, and I think that this is something that a lot of people would want to talk about, like how many cooks to have in the kitchen, right? And how to find cooks, if we're extending the metaphor, and how to and the kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, was this kind of a gentle way of asking about the poetry business, right? The dirty word of the po biz, in the sense of like, is it who you know as much as it is where you submit?
Yeah, because like 2 more days of people talking about kidney lady, and I'm throwing myself out the Twitter window.
I love that this is being recorded for some sort of posterity, and kidney lady is still managing to fuck this up, right?
If we're subpoenaed.
I made a really conscious decision yesterday or this morning when I like looked at Twitter and I saw all of the comments about this. I was like, I'm not going to read this for my personal health, because I don't think it will do anything. But so hold on, I think somebody got kicked out. So I can tell you from my experience what happened to me. So I went to a PhD program for poetry. It's where I really started getting serious about it. Before that, I was using my student loans as an excuse to play in bands. And so, yeah, I was really fucking up, as the kids say, right? And so I got to this PhD program, and it was or is a well-known PhD program in the country, and lots of famous people teach there. And so I thought, great, I'll learn from all these people, and maybe I'll make some connections too, right? But I quickly realized that, and this is, I think, perhaps the most valuable piece of advice that I can give anyone about writing, whether it's in terms of a poetry manuscript or a poem or just having a life in writing in general. Make friends, make meaningful relationships, and don't make contacts. People, especially famous people, whatever a famous writer might be, and whatever a famous poet might be, even more ironically, right? They walk through AWP in fear because they know that the landscape is one of scarcity, right? And there's this perception that they have something to give. And sometimes they might, honestly, sometimes they might, but most of the time they don't. What I've learned is that their anxieties about publishing and their worries and their work, like it's never really changes. They could be on book 10, right? And instead of saying, why won't anybody pick my book for a first book prize, they're saying, why can I never win a Guggenheim, right? And the goalpost just keeps moving. And so I guess my real answer is that this writing and poetry specifically, because there is no fame and fortune in it, right? There is no editor or a book advance or I mean, whatever, paltry $2,000 you get for a book prize or something like that, that might pay your rent. Or recoup some of the thousands of dollars of fees that you spent submitting that manuscript at $25 to $35 a pop, right? Yeah. It's a long distance race. It's not a sprint. And so I'm lucky enough to have become friends with some of the people that I worked with at school, and they've become true friends, true mentors. And I trusted them deeply with my work, and they helped me with it. I had one person that I connected with at like a kind of, I don't know, at the risk of sounding shishi, like some sort of cosmic level, right? Like I knew it, right? Like when they read my work and the feedback that they gave me, like the earth moved, right? It was like that person you see across the room or something like that, right? And I felt seen, and I felt like this was my path forward, and it changed my whole writing life. And it took me 20 years to find that person, right? And you don't always find them, I don't think. But so I had that person, and then I also had a community of readers around them, right? And so when I'm looking at a manuscript or at poems or something like that, I say to myself, like, okay, who's good at what part of this process, right? Who's good at looking at an order? Who's good at telling me what I don't want to hear about what poems I need to cut out of this manuscript, right? Who's good at telling me where I'm doing something wrong in terms of form or content or something like that. Yeah. And not to say that I don't take their advice about, I don't ask them specifically, hey, tell me about the order, but I kind of know for myself that when they give me the feedback, I'm going to pay specific attention to what they have to say about order. Right. I also think it's valuable to have people that are totally outside your aesthetic. Right before my manuscript got published, I was lucky enough to send it to a poet that I really admire, whose work is not at all like mine. Couldn't be further from it. And he gave me some great feedback, and some of it I totally disagreed with and I didn't use. And I was like, you got to have confidence in yourself too. But it also gave me completely new perspectives. And speaking to your kind of, when does it stop being edited? It never does. I was changing my manuscript constantly. I was adding poems, I was taking poems away, I was shifting the order for years, up until the point, it was accepted. And even but like when I was waiting for it to be accepted, in that period of time, I was still changing things. I was having other people edit it. And then by the time the press came back to me and said, yeah, we want your book, I said to them, great, but it looks different now. Would you like to see this version? And they said yes, and they were okay with that. If they say, no, we want to publish the version that you sent us, like flat out, that's your decision to make, right? But at least you just don't stop. Don't ever feel like it's done. And I don't know if there's too many people that can look at your work. I don't think I've ever felt like I haven't benefited from showing someone a poem or a manuscript, even if that benefit is of me saying to myself, well, I'm never going to show that person a poem or a manuscript again. Like that's still a benefit, right? Because ultimately the work is yours, and you can tell everybody else to like take a hike. Yeah. That's your prerogative. So yeah. Blending into your question about chapbook or full length, I don't know, honestly. I think I never published a chapbook. I never had much luck with it or desire to do it, because and maybe this is my own ego, I don't know what, but I was saying to myself, well, if I have 20 pages of what I think is publishable poetry, right? If I can publish these 20 pages individually, then, why not wait? Why not put it all together with the rest of the stuff? But if you already have a chapbook coming out, that's awesome. That doesn't mean that chapbook can't be included in your full length. I don't think anybody's gonna rock up on your full length and be like, well, this is crap. 20 pages of it, we're in that chapbook that was on the New York Times bestseller list. No, it's poetry, right? So people, for the most part, are going to be coming to your work fresh, no matter what happens, right? I do think chapbooks are a great way to start building a relationship with a press. I think that they're a great way to build confidence in yourself, and I think that they're a great way to get behind the scenes in the process of what it is to publish a book on a smaller scale, right? Quite literally. And so I would say, take that chapbook experience and think of it as something that's going to make you wiser in the larger publishing process. You'll know what you want to advocate for yourself more for, I think, from that experience, if that makes sense. Was that a syntactically correct sentence? As for formatting of the manuscript itself, we all convince ourselves that matters. It doesn't. Nothing matters. Nihilism forever. No, but I think that we give ourselves a lot of excuses about formatting and cover letters and biographies and everything in between. God knows I did. I was like, why isn't this happening for me, right? It's got to be the order of the poems. The order is the thing that everybody comes back to, right? Because it's a lot easier to shift things around than it is to write new poems. And so I think if you just keep your formatting simple, ultimately what's important is the poems themselves, over and over and over again, the poems themselves. Wait, I'm looking in the chat. Hold on. Jan, did I talk? Okay. You got locked out of the session leader's good graces after that. It's going to happen.
He tore me apart.
Yeah. But also fuck them. Right. Because I don't know. I've had, maybe that book isn't for that person or that press, right? Maybe that's just what it comes down to. Maybe that person was having a bad day. Maybe, ultimately, and it's, as someone that's judged poetry contests, maybe the reader ate a ham sandwich instead of a tuna sandwich that day, and that's why they don't like your book. It can be that arbitrary, and it sucks. It really sucks. But the important thing is to keep working and keep believing, right? I was a finalist for the National Poetry Series 2 years in a row. And I was sitting, it was like I was sitting by the phone waiting for the hottest date in the world to call me, right? For months. And nobody called. And I saw the books that came out those years with the National Poetry Series, and some of them were great, and some of them I was like, what in the hell, right? And that was just me. That's my opinion. But somebody else liked them, and that was what was right for that press, right? At that time. So I don't know. Does that answer a question that nobody asked? Somebody said they had another question. Jan, you wanted me to talk about my book, which I'm happy to do. Thanks for buying a copy. That's nice of you. Or stealing one. I advocate stealing it more than buying it. But, oh, you have the poster too. That's sweet. Shayna, what was your other question that you wrote that you said that you wrote in the chat?
I was just writing. I wrote that so I wouldn't forget it, and then I started writing the rest in the chat. I'm really sorry for dominating this if other folks have questions.
Okay.
So now I have two more. So the first is, if you get rejected by a press or a publisher that you really, really like and think that your work is perfect for them, and you get that generic email, it's like, we loved your work, but not now, stay in touch. Should you stay in touch? And if so, how? And then the second question, this is more like PhD, MFA oriented, but it's also for books, I suppose. I had a professor who won a Guggenheim, was on the Guggenheim advisory board, someone I trust with every poem I've ever written. His work is stunning. And I sent him my MFA packet and asked him if he thought I was ready. I finished my undergrad in poetry like 10 years ago. And he said he thought I need more variety, but like, aren't we supposed to have a voice? What's more important, having a lot of poems in an established voice, or
Oh, geez, that's like
range?
That's an existential question, right? But in terms of getting into a program, all right. And Gina, I saw your question too, and I'm not going to ignore it. So, in terms of getting into a program, so I worked I worked in an administrative role in a PhD program for a few years. And I got to see a little bit about how the sausage is made with admissions. And it's truly sausage in some ways, in the sense that it's a little gross, and you don't want to think about it too much. But I do think that what matters the most is researching the faculty. And like, there might be like, whoever you sent your manuscript to, right, wherever they teach, for them, they're interested in more variety of voice. There's probably another faculty member who's at some other school that's more interested in a more cohesive voice, like you were talking about, right? I would say it's almost like putting together a book manuscript, like craft the best packet you can for the individuals that are going to be looking at your work. Because ultimately what it comes down to is somebody is going to look at it and go, oh yeah, Shane is my pick, right? Or and that's how the ball gets rolling in terms of admissions. To answer, I think like Ren had this question and Shana had this question, and like if you submit to a press that you love or a prize at a press that you love and you get rejected, and they tell you to stay in touch or something like that, stay in touch. I mean, I'm not saying email them all the time. Don't I wouldn't necessarily reach out to the editors individually and be like, hey, what's going on? But they change readers. They change judges. If it's a different judge, also research judges for poetry contests. Honestly, like, I wasted a lot of money sending my book to contests where, like, I deep down in my heart, I knew that judge wasn't going to like my poems. I knew that. I'm not like some, experimental poet, right? Why would I send my poetry book to, I don't know, a contest where like Forrest Gander's the judge or something, right? Like, what am I doing, right? And so I would say always think you can resubmit it if you think it's going to be a good fit for the press, especially if you revise it, right? If they say stay in touch and you revise it, submit it again. Most of the people that read before a judge, right? Because it doesn't just go straight to the judge. There's probably 2 or 3 tiers of people before that judge. And one of those tiers is probably some sort of overworked, underfed graduate student who is looking more to reject manuscripts to get done with their job than to pull the wheat from the chaff, right? And that's when it comes down to eating the ham sandwich instead of the tuna, right? So do not feel like you can't submit again, especially if you're a semifinalist or a finalist or something like that. Send it again. That means it got somewhere and someone paid attention. So I think that, Bren, did that answer your question? And Gina, so and Ren, feel free to say if it did or not in the chat, and I can go back to it. The process of publishing a poetry book, what do you mean by as far as individual poems in journals?
I mean, like, if you've been publishing poems in a variety of journals, can you just then grab those poems and put them together and then publish them as a book? Or is there certain restrictions based on journal? Like what's, you know what I mean? Like if they're previously published on their own.
Well, I mean, in theory, it would be really great if you could just take them all and staple them, and then it will be your book, your fascicle, right? As Emily Dickinson said. There shouldn't be any restrictions. Journals have first serial rights, first North American serial rights. So that means that they get to publish the poem first. And most of the time what journals ask of you is to have an acknowledgements page in your book. So they get a little bit of pub where it says like poems from this book have previously been published in, and then you list the journals and the poems, right? But yeah, if you're publishing, if you find yourself seeing a trend that like your individual poems are getting picked up from journals and published, it might be time to start thinking about how those poems can come together as a book, right? And there's a whole bunch of different ways to approach this. I mean, you can just say like, okay, these are all of my poems and they're together. But I think to stand out in a slush pile, it's important to open your book with some really strong poems, perhaps some of your strongest poems. Shana, back to your question about variety. Like if you were to divide your book up into sections, right? The typical thing that like a lot of people do in the poetry world is like 3 sections, right? That's the trend now. I even did that in my book, right? But in that first section, maybe that's where you want to show a little bit more variety, a little bit more razzle dazzle, because you're like trying to hook that reader. You're trying to hook that editor, just like you would with like a shitty 5-paragraph essay, right? Where you, but with poems. Also, you're trying to like not only create a, the poems not only have to stand individually, but they have to support each other. Some people do this by kind of like building a thematic narrative throughout a book, right? Some people do this by they have concept books are really hot right now. I'm not sure if I totally understand what a concept book of poetry is versus a book of poetry, because you wrote all the poems and it's ultimately your obsessions and your concepts. So it's going to be a concept book no matter what you do, right? But project books maybe is a better term, right? But ultimately, I don't know if there's a certain number of poems you need for a book, but for like pages, you're looking 60 to 80. Let's say that. I've noticed recently, and maybe you guys have too, that a lot of poetry collections, especially first book poetry collections, are really thick. They have a lot of pages. Some of them are coming in at like 100+ pages. And I read them and I say, man, this person could have cut like 20 pages. But I think that there's an impulse to be like, well, I'm publishing my book. I might never have a chance to do this again. Let me get it all out in the world. And I can understand that. But I also think that you should try to make the tightest, most your book should be like you want to be able to bounce a quarter off that book, right? You want no fat, nothing. Like everything feels essential. Every poem, every line break, everything you do is leading towards the end of that book, hopefully. And you want your reader to get to the end of it and be done with the book and say, man, this couldn't have been any other way than it is. That's the ultimate goal when you're putting the book together. Does that answer your question, Gina, or at least start to?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Okay. Wait, there's something else. How do I suggest formatting untitled poems on a page? I don't know. I mean, you could, are they a series? Are they, how do they exist?
They're the last two poems in the book I wrote, and the chapbook, I guess, is more apt. And both of them are untitled. So I'm thinking about separating them also, because I see where that might be confusing.
Are they just like, do they just say untitled on the top now?
They say untitled in the table of contents, but on the actual page, they don't say anything. Like they just have a poem.
Are they connected?
No.
Huh. That's tricky.
The right choice might just be to title them, but
maybe I don't know. Or maybe separating them. I would try titling them, try separating them. Maybe there's some sort of and this is like a formatting thing. I was talking to a friend of mine. It's like a memoir coming out, right? And she's writing about trauma, and there's like purposeful blank pages in the book, right? Because there's this kind of like a representation of like the brain shutting off and like disconnect with trauma and stuff like that, right? And that works fine with like a physical book in your hand, right? But she is trying to do the ebook, and she's like, oh man, this is going to be really weird because you're going to scroll through the ebook, and it's just going to be like a blank. It's going to seem like there's a glitch in the program or something like that, right? So what she decided to do, there's like a theme of ants in the book, right? And so what she decided to do was get really simple clip art ants and put like 3 across the middle of the blank page. So maybe there's some other, all of that is an example to say like maybe there's some other visual indicator that can return or make readers aware of the separation or something like that. Maybe it's as simple as an asterisk, or maybe it's more complicated like ants. I don't know. Was that helpful? It's hard without seeing the poems themselves. But was that helpful? Yes.
It definitely was. If that was an invitation to see the poems, I will definitely send them. But
sure, yeah, I'm always down for poems. Yeah, I'll put my email address in the chat. There's only 6 of you. How bad could it get? Here it is.
Thanks. If you think they're garbage, just don't answer.
Oh no, I'll always answer. I mean, I don't feel like garbage is like a really constructive response, right? But if I have things to say about them, I'll say them. I'm not gonna hold back, but I'm not gonna be a dick either. Okay, other questions? Jan, you said you wanted me to talk about my book. Set me up. What do you want me to say? How great it is to everyone? It's the best. Read my book. Yes, it is tight. Other questions? We've come so far with just questions. I don't know how to like go on my like specific ramble right now. How about like finding places to send your book? What's going on in my mind's eye with the order? Okay, we can talk about both things. Okay, so my book's in 3 sections because I'm a stereotype. The middle section of the book is 1 long poem with individually titled sections. And so I didn't really see the shape of this book until I wrote that long poem. It's called, the poem's called Tour. And it's about like tour. It's about me using my student loans to play in rock bands. And so I realized that after I wrote this like 10, 15 page poem, that it was actually informing all of the other poems in the book. in the way that I realized that the manuscript or the book was kind of like an origin story for this like speaker who exists in the book. And so I thought that putting that in the center and then letting all the other poems kind of radiate outward from it or introduce it or create commentary on it afterwards was like a successful way to create narrative tension, not only between the poems, but with the book as a whole. And I know that sounds abstract without like the book in front of you, but that's what I was thinking about. And I bet some of you are thinking about similar things, either whether it's with long poems or untitled poems. Like, why are these poems untitled, right? Why is your impulse to put them last? They have some sort of significance, right? Obviously, but there's also something that is significant about what's being withheld, right? So, does an untitled poem end the book? Does it open the book, right? I lied. I also have a poem, like before section 1, I have a poem before it as like almost like an epigraph. That's hoping to kind of inform readers like this is a legend. This is a key to how to start to unpack the speaker in this. Maybe there are poems in your book that can do something like that. Does that mean you open to reading a chapbook manuscript then? Yeah, sure. I mean, it's going to take me a while to respond to you. I'll be honest, because, life, but like, I don't know, I want to be a good poetry community citizen. I've been here in Philly for like, 4 years now. And well, the pandemic really hurt, but like, I haven't really gotten to know many local poets. And so I'd love to get to know people's work. I feel like that's the most important part of things, right? And so, yeah. And long poems aren't like cool right now. I don't know, like Charles Wright, like ruined it for everyone. I don't know what the deal is, but as someone who writes long poems, sometimes I feel like that's a bummer, and I feel like they should get more play than they do, and they're a really hard form to sustain. And if you're looking for a poet who does it really well, perhaps better than anyone else consistently, there's a poet named Kevin Proofer, who is like a long poem ninja. Like he's fantastic. Kevin Proofer is his name. I can't sing his praises highly enough. He's a fantastic poet. But yeah, I don't know. And again, I submitted that long poem tour as like a chapbook several times. And it was always like just not long enough, or like they wanted a couple other poems around it, or they just didn't like it, or whatever. I finally got it published. I think people would publish excerpts from it. I finally got it published in its entirety somewhere, but by then I was like, it didn't even matter. And so I feel like a long poem can be an unwieldy beast. A good place to send long poems, if you're feeling up to it, is there's a magazine called At Length, which is they specialize in long poems, and they're pretty great. Was there another question in the chat? Did and speaking of sending things somewhere, I know that it can be overwhelming, because I don't know what your inbox is like, but my many inboxes, let's be honest, my many inboxes are bombarded constantly by some university press or magazine or person or whoever saying, we have a prize, we have a contest, we have a send here, send there, send everywhere. So the kind of possibilities seem endless, right? It's at least for me, it was kind of overwhelming, right? And I think you like it can be kind of difficult to decide where you want to send your work. Do people feel like that's true, or am I just projecting my problems onto you?
I think
There's-
that's fair.
Yeah, we got a couple nods. Black square folks, thumbs up. Yeah. I think, I don't know. I think it depends on what you're into it for, right? I think there are a lot of really, what the internet's done and what print on demand publishing's done is allow a lot of people to kind of break down the gatekeeping walls of presses, right? And create their own and look for different voices and identities and all that stuff. And I think that it's wonderful. I really do. And I think that that's how it should be. But I also think it's pretty unfortunate that sometimes those presses disappear because they don't have the funding to sustain them, or the labor of love that this one person was doing, right? They just can't do it anymore because their mom got sick or whatever it is, right? And so I think that it's important to remember the value of your work and to ask yourself, like, who am I entrusting it to? I don't think that means that everybody has to publish with like a university press or like a Grey Wolf or whatever else, right? These kind of large entities. But I do think that there is a whole plethora of options between Grey Wolf and Keith's Fun Time Poetry Press Emporium blog basement thing, right? And you've worked really hard on this thing, right? At least I would assume you have, perhaps like a good percentage of your life, right? So you want it to exist in posterity. You want it to be valued and treated well by the people at the press. You want them to help you get the word out, right? So I guess, I mean, this is a controversial piece of advice, but if you find yourself being accepted for publication by a press and then alarm bells start ringing a little bit, things don't feel right, and you're not sure that they're going to be the best custodians of your work or something like that, don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to take your work somewhere else. I know that sounds crazy because you've worked so long to just get somebody to say yes, right? But you ultimately might be happier saying no than yes. I've seen and heard horror stories. I've also I've known people that have said no, and eventually their work does come out at the place where they where they want it to be, right? Because they had faith in their work and the work stood up. What do those alarm bells sound like? They sound like a variety of different things, right? If your press, you know them when you hear them, right? Yeah. Yeah, if the editor's taking some like crazy liberties with your work without necessarily your permission, if you get your book cover and it looks like something that you could have drawn in Microsoft Paint. Does Microsoft Paint still exist? Anyway, if you see that they're engaged in other kind of like nefarious editorial practices in terms of the way that they treat submissions or the way that they value or devalue your labor for editing the book or laying out the book, if they're asking you to do their work for them, unless it's like one of those publishing collectives, which is like an entirely different animal. I don't know if they are just kind of, if they ask you for money. That's a big one. Yeah, I mean, they can come in all different forms. But I think what I'm saying is like, if you think you hear them, you probably do. If you're asking at all, like, hey, does this seem right to me? Like, there's something off. I mean, that was hyperbole. The MS Paint covers, that was hyperbole. But like, I mean, even like, and some presses are more precious than other presses in terms of how the input they allow you to have in terms of your book design, right? Some presses employ designers, and they're going to do it, and you can tell them whether you like it or not, and your input will matter somewhat, but ultimately it's really what they think is going to market the best, and other presses will allow you to have a hand in it, and ultimately you'll end up somewhere in between. If you're looking for places to publish and presses that are good, I would start by whenever I go to a presses page, I see whose books have come out from that press. If I recognize at least a name or two names, I say okay. If I don't recognize any names, I go okay, and then I click on the names or do a little research and start looking up who these folks are, right? And sometimes it's just my ignorance. I've found some great poets that way. You can't know everyone. There's so much poetry out in the world, right? And so, I'm proven wrong, and I learned something new and whatever. But sometimes when you start like digging a little bit and researching things, and then people, you see these poets and you've never heard of their bios, and you've never heard of any of the journals that they publish in or anything like that. And it just keeps getting more and more obscure. And you're like, oh, maybe, like, at least for me, maybe that's not the press, right? But I think you just want to find a place that's a good fit for you, which is really easy to say from like the catbird seat, because like, I don't know. I don't even know if I'm in the catbird seat. I have to publish a whole nother book. But if I had had somebody telling me this like 2 years ago, I would have been like, yeah, right. Like whoever wants my book can have it. Yeah, it's also easy to grab two friends and open a press, for better or for worse, right? And some great art has come that way, right? If the music industry has taught us anything, right? DIY was one of the most wonderful things that ever happened to music. I think that maybe the jury's still out on literature a little bit, and maybe the jury's still out on music too. I have no idea but I like some great presses have come and gone, and also some of the people running them turn out to like not be the greatest people. But that's like everywhere. Oh man, it's almost 5 o'clock already. We're running out of time. I'm going to stop rambling. Other questions? Other thoughts? Are you working on a book or poems for a book, and do thoughts of publishing get in the way? I just started working on poems again. No, I don't really have any expectation that anybody will ever want to read a book of mine ever again. I don't indulge myself that much. So I got one. I conned everybody once, but I just try to write the best poems I can. I'll admit that like I'm starting to see how they could fit together into I'm starting to see patterns, but I don't come to individual poems going, how will this get published, right? If I've written quite a few poems, and I've said to myself, man, this will never get published. And then I think to myself, well, maybe it'll go in a book manuscript, because then they have to take it, right? There are some poems that I took out of my manuscript that was published when I was sending it to prizes, because I got feedback from some readers at presses, like some preliminary readers at presses. I got feedback that they were the content of the poems were like too upsetting or too risque or whatever. And so I never agreed with it. I thought it was a bit pearl clutchy. But nevertheless, my goal was to publish the book, right? So I took those poems out And as soon as I got my acceptance thing and they asked me for like some edits and stuff, I slid those poems right back in. And because they needed to be there. And my editor was good enough to say like, oh yeah, these are important. But yeah, I don't know. I just write poems. Does that answer your question, Jan? I don't. I just try to write poems. It's hard enough to do that. Don't even think about a book. Just write fucking poems. It's so difficult. Like, whoa. How does anyone exist in, like, how does anyone like go to the DMV and also write poems? Like it doesn't compute, right? Like so the day-to-day operations of life are not suited to poetry writing. Not that going to the DMV is day-to-day. Anyway, I digress. Working a desk job to pay for submissions and classes. Yeah, exactly. There's that too, right? And like there's the economy of all of this, which is incredibly fucked up in some ways. Oh, cheers. Thanks, Jan. I think that like that's another thing that we haven't really touched on. I don't even know if we have time, but like, you know, things might have changed in the sense that like the gatekeepers of book contests in the way that they look or their backgrounds or what they're looking for in work, but there's still an economy to this, right? In the sense that it's really hard to pay $25 a pop to sometimes to send your book out to presses. You send it to 10 prizes or whatever, that's $250. That's like a car payment or yeah, or groceries for a couple of weeks or a cable bill or whatever it is, right? Like that's wild when you think about it. So there's like a different type of economic gatekeeping going on here, right? And I don't really know what to do about that. I think that some presses are finally starting to give fee waivers, but some presses really need that money to exist. I don't think they're like poetry presses aren't getting rich off those fees, right? They're using those fees to publish your book. That's what pays for printing the book that they select. So in some ways it's like a necessary evil, but in other ways it's still just a total evil, right? And I don't know what we do about it, but I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have in the last 30 seconds of our allotted time, where we will solve all of the world's problems. I don't know. Thanks for coming, guys. I really enjoyed this. I hope that some of you email me. You don't even have to send me poems. Say hi, whatever. And I wish you all luck in your publishing endeavors. I know it's a long road. I really, really do. So like, stay on it. This is where you stop recording. That was like a really good movie. Like, stay on it.